And we are live on the Gamification Revolution. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm your host, Gabe Zickerman. So glad to have you all here with us. And I'm in lovely Phoenix, which, of course, you can tell from my backdrop. That's Phoenix. And I'm joined today by John Hendricks from Boombox. Hi, John.
Hey Gabe, how are you?
So
Thank you
good
for
to have
inviting
you.
me.
Thanks. Thank you for being here. John's in lovely New York. Hopefully, we'll hear a fire truck or two pass by. That's how you know you're in New York. For all of you joining us for the first time, welcome. To be part of this conversation, and you can ask us any questions that you want. We'll answer them. You can also join us live on camera. You've got to first sign in here on Spreecast. Click that social login button. Use Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. Come online with us. Then you can click the question button or the camera button, which are probably located down here, but they could be somewhere else. Click one of those buttons, ask your question. We'll bring it on screen. We'll get to it if we have time. It's a pretty rapid fire event. And for those of you joining us asynchronously on the video podcast or on the podcast, thanks for being here. You can follow me at GZicherm, GZICHERM on Twitter. And this show is regular every Thursday around 1 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern Time, unless my travel schedule prevents it. Before we continue on the topic of travel schedule, want to remind all of you who don't know about it that we are in the middle of this amazing G Summit global event. I've been traveling around the world. I've already been to nearly half a dozen countries, meeting with folks, doing live workshops. We have an online component as well. You're welcome to join it. Lots of great new speakers, all new content, and live Q&A with these speakers, plus these in-person workshops, online and offline. It's gsummit.com. Please join us if you can. It would be great to have you. Okay, so John, you're involved in the creative industries. You're getting a reputation now and winning some awards for your work at the intersection of games and creative. I have kind of a tough question for you, and I'm curious about your opinions. Some of the worst executions of games and gamification have come out of creative agencies in the last decade. There's been a lot of what feels like box checking, companies making terrible branded games being kind of the main example. When are we going to get to the point where agencies, creative folks really start to embrace and understand the principles of gamification and start doing amazing things with game concepts the same way they're able to do with the 30-second spot?
Hopefully soon. I mean, you touch on something that's very near and dear to my heart. Um, the, my fear with gamification overall is that we're approaching it really the same way that we a long time ago approached Web 1.0, where big brands were saying, "Hey, let's build a website," and say, "Well, why do you want to do that?" And they would say, "Well, we want to get a lot of customers, we want stickiness, we want eyeballs, and we're going to be wealthy." And then, we all know where that went when, the bubble popped. And they say, "Gee, that's never going to happen again." And then all of a sudden, Facebook pages come out and social media, and we heard the same thing over again. Clients would say, "Well, we want a Facebook page, we want a lot of likes, and we're going to just grow our business." Well, now here we are with this next great um, way of engaging people, and in a much more profound way, by the way, than social ever could by itself or web ever could by itself. And people are saying, "I want to do some gaming. I want to, sprinkle some gamification stuff on it." The, um, the our answer to this and what we're doing is really bringing a lot of behavioral science to this, so that you know exactly what you're trying to accomplish. Um, and we almost put square braces in. If you Anytime you say that you want to engage people much more deeply, we could change that and say, well, we can most likely use game science and gamification to do that. But if you don't know why you want to engage people, what is the ROI, what are the KPIs, then you're not going to know what you're going to get out of using gamification. So
So
the frustration, go ahead.
yeah, and so I think that's a very interesting point that you made, not to derail you, but I often say this in the workshops that I teach about how to do gamification, and I really feel this way. Whenever I do a gamification project for a client, I often start by being their therapist. Do you ever feel that way?
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? Like they bring you
It
in
takes
with
a
this, yeah, with this idea that you're going to put some game stuff together, and really what you need to do is get to the heart of the matter. What's your experience with that?
Yeah, no, I think exactly that. People are, we've all seen the stats most likely, but Forrester is predicting that by the end of 2014, 80% of the Fortune 1000 is going to have tried gamification. They're also predicting that 70% of those folks will fail to meet their objectives. And it's because of the briefing process. A lot of it, I think, what's going on, especially when you're dealing with large companies, if you look at how social is generally handled, it's a centralized function, it's an awareness function, and there's not a tremendous amount of true accountability in terms of ROI brand growth. Well, gamification seems to be handled that same way. So when you go in, when there's an interest in doing it, whether the CMO or senior leadership says that we want to do gamification, there's not a lot of specific objectives. And where we're finding it to work better is to really drill down to a product level and start there. So the shorter answer to your question is that we try and really go in at the product level now and put a very discrete program around it, as opposed to where we used to go in at a brand level overall and say, hey, we're going to use gamification to grow part of the business.
What do you do when a client resists that KPI stuff? That comes up for me a lot, because I always start with, we need to define what it is that we're trying. Cool, you love gamification, that's great. What are we trying to do in tactical terms? How do you deal with it when a client says, well, I don't really want to be concerned with KPIs, key performance indicators?
Well, for us, we've been either lucky or, maybe we've yet to experience that. Sometimes we're going in and people have already tried gamification and have failed, and have already dealt with the wrath of, well, what did I get out of this project? And they had to sort of report back internally. So the clients that we work with are already there, and either they can't get we've had to submit a business case of some sort to get the funding, in these economic climate that we're dealing with, or already got burned. So we've been lucky, and initially there is a general infamiliarity with what the KPIs should be, but as we talk about it more and more, and for us again, we keep linking back to dollars in, dollars out. If somebody was sort of reticent about that, they quickly end up embracing the ROI thing. And what's interesting about that is that we're holding ourselves to a tougher yardstick than we necessarily need to be, but we're doing it because we want to make sure that we have good successes, that the client is happy with it, and to be really blunt, we've got good references for that. So we haven't had situations where people are resistant to the KPIs.
Well, and just to clarify, Beth asked the question in chat about, what is a KPI? And just to be clear, it usually stands for key performance indicator, or another way to think about it is key metrics. So John, it's good that you're not having problems with that. So I think that's awesome. Dean mentioned in chat that he's been working on a project about gamifying, bringing games to people with disabilities. And, not to dwell on his specific case, but he talks about this issue about, maybe trying to figure out the metrics. And so my question for you is, okay, so let's say you don't have resistance to the concept of metrics being the baseline for success in a gamified project. How do you actually go about figuring out what the right metrics should be? How does one do that?
Well, I think when you focus on return on investment, that is very illuminating, because if you're a marketer or a business person and saying, well, do I spend my money on this versus something else? The question that you intrinsically are asking is, well, why would I spend money on this? And am I looking to have my brand win an award? Then you say, okay, well, that's in effect is how you're going to handle it. But if you're saying, look, I want to drive awareness. So, if we did a program for Delta last year where they wanted to really drive a lot of awareness that they are investing very heavily in the New York airport market. And what we were trying to do is really get a big fat buzz out there and have a lot of people really talking about and living through gamification this experience that, wow, Delta is really doing some interesting stuff and really putting a lot into the redcoats. So there was that metric was, well, we want awareness, and if we don't do it here, then how much would it cost us to do if we use traditional media or another way of getting the word out?
What is awareness, though?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, awareness is really the number of people that, ultimately from a branding standpoint, if you did research, whether it's aided recall or unaided recall, but how many of those people would say, what's New York City's hometown airline? You want those people to answer Delta Airlines, not JetBlue. So awareness, unaided would be that, and aided would be, well, of these four brands, JetBlue, Delta, United, and something else, American, which would you say is just
Well, but don't,
airline?
so,
Then you say, oh, yeah, that's right.
so what's interesting about that though is typically I think that the agencies are the ones who don't really want to be measured, right? A great deal of the inertia around this is that the creative folks, the external creative folks would prefer if they were just validated on whether or not the client thinks the creative is cool. But what you're really talking about actually fairly disruptive, which is this idea that the person doing the creative in the case of gamification should actually be measured on the success, literally the success of the project. How do you even wrap your arms around that? Don't you now have to be experts in product and market and everything just to be able to do a project like that for Delta Airlines?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. It's agencies live or die based on their portfolio. I mean, when you're a client, you're RFPing it. You may ask the question about, well, what kind of results have you gotten? But really, you're looking, what's the sexy work you've done? What awards have you won, and are you going to really bring this magic and sparkle to my brand? So there's a vested interest in their having a good portfolio with really what I would say sexy, creative, and award-winning stuff. And you're absolutely right. But our firm really, the DNA of the firm has always been to understand the client's business so that we can do cool things with digital. And the cool thing with digital that we really focus on these days, especially the past couple of years, is gamification.
So what's the cool
Um,
thing that you did for Delta? Tell us about the actual project that you did there, because I understand that it won some awards and a lot of notoriety.
Sure. So we actually have done, we're in the midst of doing our fourth program with them in 3 years that are all based on game science and behavior. Um, Last year, or 2 years ago, we did a program that was crowdsourcing. So we had teams competing with teams. So we basically went out and we asked all of the Delta Sky Mile loyalists um, to say, hey, we want to just do a good old-fashioned competition where you guys go out and build teams of people who are not currently Sky Mile members, and you're going to compete to earn Sky Miles. And during this period, it's a few-month period, during this period, every time you or somebody on your team books a trip, everybody gets points. So you're just for participating, you're earning points. And then there was this leaderboard where the teams were competing against one another, and then there was a massive giveaway. That drove staggering eight-figure numbers in incremental ticket sales based on the success of it. So you hear the ROI, you hear the business objectives, and for us, we really had to go in and say, well, how would we move the needle? So there was a lot of framing of the business model there. That led to the next project where this was the awareness, and with the consolidation, so I'll talk about the business objectives. With the massive consolidation of the airline industry that we're all seeing after really 2008, winning in New York City is a big deal because that is the biggest air hub in the world when you take JFK, LaGuardia, and Newark and put them together in terms of dollar volume and flight volume. So being known as the hometown airline is a very, very important thing. So we framed out the program and said, okay, what we're really looking for is not just reach, not just the number of gross impressions, and not just multiple impressions, because as we're all crazed these days, and we're all ADD, we're all overwhelmed, and we're putting up walls to block out messages, we need a message that's really going to sink into our subconscious and stay there. So we need a lot of impressions that are sustained. So we said, okay, well, how can we do that? Using the best of behavioral science and game science, we wanted people to engage on a daily basis. So we went out and we basically took the red code, which is really the manifestation of their superior brand service, in much the way that Nordstrom's, that's that example where a woman came in, handed the guy her keys to her car and said, I need tires. He went out and got the tires changed, and she became a customer for life. the redcoats are really the biggest differentiating thing about Delta Airlines because everybody's got good service, everybody's investing in their infrastructure and facilities. So we took these redcoats and we said, okay, that's the thematic relevance, that's the essence of the brand differentiation. Let's put them out and about New York City for a period of 6 weeks, and we're going to do a weekly scavenger hunt, and we're going to have people interacting with these people. We're going to have people finding these people. We're going to have the thematic relevance of the redcoats with the New York market, which is again where we want to be known. So we want to be connecting with people. And what these people were doing, all the winners and all the contestants ended up, the grand prize was a charter flight on Delta from New York City to LA where they saw the band Fun. Nobu catered an event, and it was just a weekend party. So, it sounds like all of these sort of, different things, bells and whistles, I would say, but what we were trying to do very specifically is we want to find people and every day, every week, have them competing all the way through in a simple way so that they were thinking about Delta Airlines and New York City, connecting the Redcoat, New York City, Redcoat, New York City.
So you said something very interesting, which I always think is and this is a great, really fascinating case study, and folks, certainly need to check out Boombox Inc. and follow you guys on Twitter and kind of keep abreast of the stuff that you're doing. But one of the things that a few things jump out at me. So one thing you said was, this very simple thing where we get people to come and do something every day. So one of the things that I often think bedevils folks is that they overcomplicate the design, especially the first design. They're looking for some single magic bullet solution right on day one that is going to solve every problem for their engagement challenge that they have from now until the end of time. It sounds like actually you guys have sort of really focused on two, what sounds like actually pretty straightforward solutions to these sort of challenges. What advice would you give folks when it comes to thinking about how to design this kind of engagement? How would you help them cut through all the clutter and focus on, doing something that's simple and straightforward? What advice would you give people?
Thanks. That's an excellent question. And the overloading of ambition, I would say, for what a game will do is probably the single biggest reason why this stuff risks failing at times. What we do is we've built a 5-step model that basically identifies one of 5 different stages of behavioral mindset that someone could be at. And what we overlay that model and say, okay, if you're dealing with somebody at the pre-contemplation stage, which is the first stage, which generally speaking is where you would find awareness. So you can overlay this model into a customer lifecycle or a sales funnel. So if you have pre-contemplation, what you're dealing with is people who have really never heard of your brand or never considered it for a problem. And that's where the focus belongs, not on building loyalty, not on getting better customer service, but you're really focusing on what stage of behavior you're trying to change. So, going back to your earlier question, if a customer came to us and said, I want to do these 3 things, we'd say, well, you know what, we can do them over time. But if you were to prioritize which of those 3 things is the most important based on how it's going to drive your brand growth and your business, which of those 3 things would you choose? And that's where we start. So we'll overlay it to that particular behavioral stage, and then we map that to behavioral techniques. Like, for instance, at that particular stage, we're trying to get people to actively think about how their life, to almost explore challenges in their mind. So we're planning not the product idea, but we're putting things that are peripheral to a particular challenge in their mind. And then finally, we've matched that up with particular types of gameplay that these days happen to work well dealing with that stage. So we've taken a lot of the risk out of it, and then there's the ROI out of it. So again, the answer to your question is really focusing on what particular behavioral stage you want to change, or what part of the customer lifecycle you want to change, because you can't do it all.
Were you concerned at all and I think that's very good advice, were you concerned at all when you did the kind of leaderboard team challenge? Were you concerned, or was there any pushback about creating such pure competitive energy in an environment? What can you say about the kind of balancing of competition and the things that you design?
That's interesting. I think what you're dealing with, it probably isn't as much the competitive energy as much as the risk that you're going to get some negative blowback. So I think one of the things, both with social and we deal with that in a similar way with gaming is that, oh my God, what happens if people start to complain about this? The game, the game, if they don't win the game, are they going to transfer that frustration back on the brand? Are they going to claim the brand in a public domain? Are they going to just be unhappy customers? So really what we're trying to do is frame the competitive spirit is to make the game simple, achievable, and certainly make sure that there's a degree of governance around it so that you're not allowing a very, very open-ended experience where people could really take your game into a dark spot. So a good example of that could be when we're doing programs with Instagram, you don't want people taking a picture of nudity or the private parts and then posting it because that's a nightmare.
Well, that's only one kind of dark spot, though, John. Just putting it in a different context, since you brought up Instagram. I mean, Instagram is a community largely fueled by sort of altruistic behavior. Just people kind of purely saying, "I like this. I think this is cool," or "This isn't cool," expressing kind of basic social connections with each other. Isn't there a risk that when you layer some degree of competition onto that, if you've already got this sort of robust social interaction that's purely based on people liking each other, and suddenly you introduce a like, hey, now top person is going to get an all expenses paid trip to LA on a chartered flight and all this stuff, aren't you in danger of kind of poisoning the well there?
I think that's an excellent point, but to not go there, to operate out of fear generally is not a good thing. And I think, to the altruism, um, I do think will work itself out because I think at some point there's going to be fatigue with, really being cynical or critical of, of brands consistently. Like at some point, it's not going to be new news. We're all human. Whether politicians are going off the deep end right now by showing bad parts of their life. Brands, I think, are at some level going through a catharsis or a closet cleaning of showing bad parts. And at some point, I think the norm is going to be there's good parts and bad parts. There'll probably be a gravitational pull for that. Or as consumers, we're going to sort of tune that out or learn to deal with a bit of cynicism.
So that's an interesting point. Like Ivan mentioned here in chat. He said you got to stir the pot to get a good stew going, which I think is that's a very countrified comment from you, Ivan. But let's just go with this for 1 second. How is there a risk, and how do you manage this risk when you're working with clients? How do you manage the risk of taking things a step too far? Whether that's designing for young people versus old people, or designing for maybe a more conservative or more open-minded customer base. How do you deal with that particular issue with clients? Do you self-censor? What's your strategy?
Yeah, that's a very good question. For us, we tend to work with big brands who tend to have a pretty big governance and compliance, culture or infrastructure. So, we do work with American Express, we do work with, Delta Airlines, we do work with Johnson & Johnson, Little Remedy. So they're all, very aware of the risks. So we have to pull it back. And a lot of times what we're doing is more either moderated with sandboxes type things, so we're not posting an unsavory image or photo or comment, or having closed-ended options. So I can deliver an authentic brand experience and get you connected with a brand and familiar with a brand in a thematically relevant way, um, using certain closed-endedness. In other words, I don't have to have you write an essay or an open-ended tweet. I can have you, participate. Like we did, what in effect was a hot or not hot for pets for a program we did for American Express. So
And what
you
was,
submitted your
yeah,
photos and
tell us about it.
you submitted this stuff. So yeah, it was interesting because what was going on there was it was the photo gift card. So if you think of gift cards, the market is flooded now with gift cards and the plastic gift cards that we give. So Home Depot, you could do Cold Stone, you could do Visa, you could do any of these things. And those are great for holidays, but they're not strategically known, or they're not known to be given throughout the year. So the strategy was to say let's get less dependent on December sales and try and spread it out around the year. So you say, okay, what are the obvious holidays? Well, birthdays, Mother's Day, Father's Day, Valentine's Day. Well, God help you if you show up, on Mother's Day for your mom with a gift card. There's nothing says that I didn't think about Mother's Day more than that or a check. So so going back to the behavioral model, and you say pre-contemplation, these weren't people that were simply unaware of the gift card. They actually had an inherent bias against using this card for certain, markets, certain areas. So we worked with American Express on the photo gift card, and basically said, you know what, that fundamentally changes the whole thing around. If you put a photo on the gift card, is the creation of the photo, the sharing of it, and all of a sudden, I've turned this from being a very impersonal thing to a highly personal thing. I have more of a connection with that and the creation of it than I would buying a Hallmark card, which is when you care enough to send the very best for mom. So what we did was, instead of going out there and saying, let's just simply give offers or even TV commercials that, you can put your photo on here and it makes it great and all these special moments. We said, let's get people in an organic way, in a way that they care about this stuff, in a way they care about their own stuff, and gradually using sustained engagement and gamification, bring them into having their own epiphany so that when it comes time to buy a present for mom or for the husband or wife, a partner, you name it, that this subconsciously becomes part of the consideration set. So what we did was we said, let's put it on some neutral territory. And we said that when we looked out at the world, we said, 60% of US households have a pet of some sort. It could be a goldfish, it could be a dog, it could be a horse, an alligator. And people that have pets are many of us are infatuated by our pets, and it's sort of an escape. And we've seen the Gucci coats on dogs, the ridiculous leashes, you name it. So we said, let's go out to the pet blogs without having to spend a lot of media, and let's talk about, hey, we're just simply trying to figure out who, in effect, the sexiest pet in America is. And we're running this program, that's an 8-week program. We want to have everybody submit who they think the candidates are. And then every day, we're going to do a vote off. And is it this or this, sort of the hot, this or that, sort of thing. Now, when we presented these every day, America thought they were looking at the 30,000, the gallery of 30,000 entries or the contestants in the gallery. However, we know as marketers what we were doing is we were presenting each of those photos framed in the photo gift card. So they were looking at this photo gift card over and over and over every day in that thematically relevant business context, which was, hey, there's a really deep emotional connection. There's a lot of thought that goes into putting this together. Now, there was no messaging or no marketing. It was very soft sell, and it really was about just people making, engaging something that again, they care about. When the program was over, we awarded, and the prize was a very simple prize. It was, less than, it was a few $1,000s of the winning photo gift card loaded with money. And when we then put a CRM tail on that, where we were asking people, hey, would you like, here's 5% off if you buy this, or would you like to buy this? We drove sales through the roof on this thing.
So just as sort of briefly, because we're about to run out of time, how often do you find yourselves doing things differently when you're designing gamification for the millennials versus older folks? Can you talk about just briefly kind of the differences between those two audiences for what you do?
Yeah, it's interesting. We have a lot of millennials. We have both groups of people here. So when we go into our brainstorming and ideation, we have a lot of discussions around that. And I think probably the biggest consideration when you're differentiating those two groups right now that comes into our conversations is not really the game mechanics in as much as the game device. So what we're doing for millennials, it has to be mobile, and not just mobile. It has to really be mobile smartphones. When we're doing it for, let's say boomers, it really is still desktop, and there's not enough of it yet. The crossover point is probably the tablet, but it's really the location. And if you take it to an extreme in certain contexts, it could be for Xbox.
Awesome.
There's
Well, great, and it's been awesome talking to you, John. This
Thank you.
gamification revolution always goes so quickly, and really fascinating, really interesting insights. Folks can find out more about you at boomboxinc.com, and also follow Boombox on Twitter at Boombox Inc. Thanks again, John Hendricks, for being with us.
Thank you very much. This is great.
And to all of you, thanks for joining us this week on the Gamification Revolution. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at @gzakerm. We're going to be back with you next week with another edition of the show. This time, my good friend and co-founder Aaron Price will be on to talk about gamifying live events with LiveCube. Until next week, everyone, keep gamifying stuff and keep having fun. We'll see y'all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.